Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A Higher Dimension, your now bi-monthly podcast. I'm Gloria from Gloria Danvers Hypnosis, and I'm your host for A Higher Dimension. When I first started this podcast last year, I really meant for it to be centered around past life regression and spiritual exploration and things like that. And that's still a space that I love and explore and work with and share as much as possible. But over time, this podcast has developed its own consciousness. Now it's something with a life and a personality of its own. And I think it's kind of like having a kid. You may think you know who they're going to be, but as they grow, they show you who they actually came in to be, and eventually what they came in for. And that's what this podcast has done. It's grown into a space for bigger conversations about healing, consciousness, transformation, and the meeting point between our human and spiritual experiences. It's about science and quantum physics, where they meet and where they merge. So today's podcast very much reflects that. And I got the idea from a meme. If you know me on social media, you know I am a fool for memes, especially funny ones, but also thoughtful ones. And one of my favorite memes is about the particles in our body being beyond ancient. That the elements in our bones and our blood, the things that we're composed of, are actually forged in the stars. That in a very literal way, we are made of stardust. So once I started thinking about that, another question came right behind it. And it was this: if the matter in our bodies is ancient, and if the body is constantly changing, constantly renewing, constantly exchanging matter with the world around it, then what exactly are we? And then the next question came in, and this one was where things really opened up for me. If the universe keeps reorganizing itself into living beings that can think, feel, suffer, love, grieve, wonder, and ask questions, then are we one of the ways that the universe comes to know itself? I know that sounds like a big question, and it is. So today I want to go fairly deep into the physics of this, the actual science of where the body comes from, how matter is formed, and how the body is not nearly as fixed as we think it is. And then I want to move into the metaphysics of it. Because once you really sit with the science, it starts opening up some very old, very profound spiritual questions. What are we really? What is consciousness? And is human awareness just a lucky accident of chemistry? Or is it a part of something much bigger? So let's examine that piece by piece, and we'll start with the physics. The body is not what we think it is. Everything in your body is made of atoms. And that sounds so basic we almost skim right past it, but don't skim right past it. Everything, your skin, your heart, your bones, your brain, your eyes, every memory-making structure in your nervous system, everything that allows you to laugh, cry, hold someone, lose someone, worry, dream, love, panic, or sit up in bed at 3 a.m. wondering what your life is supposed to mean. All of that is made of atoms. And those atoms have a history. Hydrogen, for example, is incredibly ancient. It goes way back to the early universe, and it's one of the oldest building blocks there is. But the heavier elements, carbon, oxygen, iron, calcium, phosphorus, those had to be made later. They were forged in the stars. And that is the part that never stops amazing me. Because stars are not just pretty lights in the sky. They are furnaces. They are pressure systems. They are engines of creation. Inside stars, lighter elements fuse into heavier ones. And when massive stars die, especially in violent stellar explosions, those elements are released outward into space. So before the matter in your body became your body, it was participating in cosmic events that were so old and so vast that the human mind can really barely even hold it. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the oxygen that keeps you alive, the carbon that forms the backbone of life itself. All of that came through a cosmic process. That means that you are not separate from the history of the universe. You are part of the history of the universe. You are what cosmic history looks like when it becomes flesh. And then it gets even more interesting because we tend to think of the body as a thing, a fixed thing, a solid identity. We look in the mirror and think, well, there I am, same me, same body, same face, more or less. Some mornings maybe a little rougher than others, but still recognizable. But underneath that sense of stability, your body is not fixed at all. Your body is in motion. It is in exchange. It is in process. You are breathing in molecules and breathing them out. You are taking in water, food, minerals, and energy. Cells die. Cells are replaced. Tissues are repaired. Internal chemistry is shifting all the time. Some parts of the body turn over quickly, some slowly, but the larger truth remains. Your body is not a statue. It is an event. And let's sit with that phrase for a minute. You are not a static object. You are an event. You are an ongoing process of matter and energy being organized in a very specific way for a very specific period of time. That means your body is not some fixed possession. It is more like a flowing pattern. It is stable enough to give you continuity, but dynamic enough that it is never truly frozen in place. And to me, that is a much more interesting picture of being human. You are less like a sculpture and more like a flame. Now, a flame looks steady when you look at it, but it is not actually still. It is constant transformation. And it only appears stable because the process is coherent. And maybe that's closer to what a human body is, a coherent pattern. A living continuity made out of ongoing change. Your life is movement. It's relationship, change, pattern, process. And so, if the material of the body is always changing, then what gives me the sense that I'm still me? I mean, what is continuity really? Because clearly things change. Your body changes, your thoughts change, your emotions change, and your role changes. Your beliefs change, even your personality evolves. The person you were at 10 is not the person you were at 25. And that's not the person you were at 45. And hopefully that's not the person you were last Tuesday. I am not the I that I will be this time next week. And yet, with even all those changes, there is still this strange and persistent feeling of I, this inner continuity, this experiencing pressure, a sense of selfhood. Now, science can tell us a lot about how the brain functions relate to consciousness. It can tell us a lot about neural correlates, brain states, chemical signaling, and the structures involved in awareness, perception, memory, and identity. But there is still a question at the center of all of this that has not gone away, and that is, how does matter become experience? Not just behavior, not just response, not just information processing, but experience. How does electrical activity become the taste of coffee? How does chemistry become heartbreak? How does neural firing become the feeling of awe? How does a system of matter become aware that it exists? That's a pretty big mystery, isn't it? But please bear with me because I don't think we should rush past it. We can describe mechanisms, and that's important. But a description of mechanism is not the same as an explanation of inner experience. You can describe what happens in the brain when someone sees the color blue, but that doesn't really explain the fact that the blue's experienced. You can describe what happens neurologically during grief, but that doesn't explain the lived reality of grief from the inside. You can study pain pathways all day long, and that still doesn't fully capture the raw fact that pain hurts. So something very mysterious is happening here. And this is where the conversation starts moving from physics to metaphysics. Because once matter has organized itself in such a way that it becomes aware, the question becomes, was awareness somehow built into reality from the beginning? Not necessarily in a simplistic way. I don't mean little tiny human personalities floating around in atoms. I'm not saying your elbow has opinions, although I wouldn't rule that out. I mean something more subtle. I'm not saying your elbow has opinions, although I would not rule that out. I mean something more subtle. Was consciousness, or the potential for consciousness, woven into the fabric of existence all along? Because otherwise, we are left with this truly astonishing claim that a completely unconscious universe somehow, through entirely blind processes, gave rise to beings who can contemplate truth, beauty, mortality, ethics, eternity, and the meaning of existence. And so for me, this is where the door opens to the point that maybe consciousness is not an accident. This is the place where I start leaning into the metaphysical side of the conversation. What if consciousness isn't just a late-stage side effect of complexity? What if consciousness is more fundamental than that? What if matter is not dead in the way that we've been taught to think of it? What if matter is not just stuff, and consciousness is not some weird glitch that suddenly appears once the brain gets complicated enough? And I'm not pretending that science has settled that question, because it hasn't. I'm also not pretending that all metaphysical ideas are automatically true just because they're beautiful. But I do think there is room here for some very serious contemplation. Many spiritual traditions, mystic philosophies, and metaphysical systems have been saying for a long time that consciousness is fundamental, that it's not produced by reality as a secondary feature, but is intrinsic to reality itself. In other words, reality may not be merely mechanical. It may be experiential, not just expanding, not just moving, not just colliding and recombining, but in some sense aware. And if that's true, then human beings are not isolated little biological accidents in a dead universe. We are the expressions of a living one. So, maybe you are not just in the universe. Maybe the universe is expressing itself as you. And that doesn't mean your ego is the center of creation. It doesn't mean that the universe revolves around your opinions about your neighbor's yard sign choices. It means your individuality may be real without being separate. And that's a very different thing. You might imagine it like this. A wave is real. It has shape, it has motion, it has timing, it has an identity as a wave, but it is never separate from the ocean. And maybe consciousness is something like that. Maybe what we call my consciousness is a faceted expression of a greater field of consciousness, a particular lens, a particular angle, a particular form through which awareness is looking. And if that were true, then every human life would matter in a really different way. Not just because of productivity or some abstract and emotionally loaded concept of worth, not just because of status or achievement, but because every life becomes a point of view through which reality is experienced. Every sorrow, every joy, every loss, every mistake, every healing, every act of courage, every attempt to become more honest, every dark night of the soul, every moment of compassion, every terrible lesson that eventually becomes wisdom. All of that becomes part of the consciousness deepening through lived form. And that's a very different way to understand being alive. And what it means is that creation may still be happening. And now this is where the original thought becomes really powerful, because when we first brought this up, the idea was, are we continually being recreated through cosmic particles so that the universe can keep knowing itself better? And I think the answer is yes. It's probably not that the body is being remade minute by minute by fresh starlight pouring from an outer space, some kind of glitter cannon from the divine. It's probably more like this. The matter that flows through your body is mostly cycling through earthly processes. Food, water, air, minerals, the whole beautiful ordinary machinery of life. But that matter has a cosmic origin, and your body is continually being renewed by the synergy of the two. So the deeper truth in the idea is still there. You are not a one-time creation. You are an ongoing act of creation. And that matters. Why does it matter? Because most of us were raised to think of creation as something that happened once, long ago, somewhere back there, and now we're all walking around as a result. But what if creation is not over? What if creation is still happening? What if every breath, every regeneration, every thought, every perception, every moment of becoming is part of creation continuing? Well, that changes everything. Because then, life is not just a finished product. It is a living unfolding. You are not a completed object dropped into the world. You are a living process through which reality continues to organize itself. And if consciousness is a part of that, then awareness itself is part of the creation unfolding. Not just life, not just biology, but awareness. That means every time you realize that something is true, something in the universe has realized something true through you. Every time you break a destructive pattern, something in consciousness has evolved through you. Every time you learn to love better, forgive more honestly, see more clearly, or face your own darkness instead of projecting it all over everybody else, something is happening that matters beyond the personal level. It's bigger than you. Because consciousness may be learning through lived experience. That's why human consciousness is so strange and important. And now we're going to make that even more personal. There's a reason human life feels so intense. And I don't think it's just because we overcomplicate everything, although to be fair, we totally do. Human consciousness is peculiar. A star burns, a tree grows, an animal senses and responds. All of that is beautiful and amazing. But the human being does something a little different. We do not just exist. We know that we exist. We don't just suffer. We reflect on suffering. We don't just love. We make meaning out of love. We don't just die. We anticipate death. We fear death. We philosophize about death. We resist death, we grieve death, and we write poetry about death. We ask questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is this? What happens after death? What is the soul? What is reality? Am I as small as I feel? Am I as great as I intuit that I could be? Why is there something instead of nothing? Why does beauty move me? Why does truth feel the way that it does when I finally touch it? This self-reflective quality is singular and extraordinary. It's not just experience. It is experience folding back on itself and becoming aware of itself. And that's why I think human consciousness is such a powerful clue. If the universe has produced beings who can wonder about the universe, then the universe has, in some meaningful way, become capable of self-reflection. That doesn't provide a mystical worldview, but it certainly makes one more interesting. Because the human being may be one of the places where the cosmos turns inward and looks at itself. And that would mean our lives aren't just random episodes in a meaningless void. It would mean that we are participatory, not spectators, not accidents, participants. Participants in reality becoming more conscious of itself. And now, the soul enters the conversation. I'm going to move a little more fully into the spiritual side now, because I know many of you listening don't want just the science. You want the meaning. And for me, this is where the soul becomes essential. Because yes, the body is made of matter. Yes, that matter is ancient. Yes, it is continually changing. Yes, it is star-forged in origin and biologically renewed in form. But I don't believe a human being can be reduced to chemistry. I don't. I think chemistry is involved, absolutely. The body matters. The nervous system matters. The brain matters. Trauma matters. Biology, all of that matters. But I don't believe that the totality of consciousness can be reduced to the firing of neurons. I think the brain may be an interface, a receiver, a translator, a focusing mechanism, but not necessarily the ultimate source of consciousness itself. And in that framework, incarnation becomes something astonishing. The soul enters form. Form is made of ancient cosmic matter. The soul experiences through the body, learns through the body, feels through the body, and gets confused through the body too, obviously, because this whole being human thing is not always elegant and it can be a little frustrating. But the point is that physical and spiritual are not opposites here. They are partners. The body gives the soul a feeling of experience. The soul gives the body animation, meaning, direction, and depth. So now you have two streams meeting. You have the physical body, built from matter with a cosmic history, and you have consciousness, or soul, if you like, entering that body as a unique point of awareness. That is a magnificent meeting point, which means that human life is not small. It is the meeting of star matter and living consciousness. It is the meeting of cosmos and intimacy. And maybe that's why life feels so sacred and so difficult at the same time. Because it's not simple. It's not just flesh, and it's not just spirit. It is spirit in flesh, consciousness in matter, eternity having a temporary experience. And the universe knows itself through that contrast. Here's another piece I think is important. If the universe is knowing itself through lived forms, then it probably does not only do it through what we call the light. It likely knows itself through contrast, like sorrow and joy, separation and reunion, fear and courage, innocence and disillusionment, through forgetting and remembering, through fragmentation and wholeness, because consciousness often seems to deepen not only through pleasure, but through challenge. And that doesn't mean that suffering is good. And I always want to be careful here, because pain is traumatic and some pain should never have happened. But I do think one of the strange truths of being human is that consciousness often expands through what it has to wrestle with. Sometimes we come to know ourselves more deeply through loss than through ease. Sometimes compassion deepens because of what broke us. Sometimes wisdom grows in the exact place where certainty died. And if the universe is participating in experience through us, then perhaps our hardest experiences become part of a larger deepening, not because we deserve them, but because consciousness can extract meaning, truth, strength, and awakening from what would otherwise remain merely destructive. And that, to me, is one of the great spiritual powers of being human, that we can alchemize experience. We can turn pain into wisdom, fear into clarity, wounding into compassion, shadow into understanding. And when we do that, something real happens. Science and metaphysics do not have to fight. They are two sides of the same coin. I don't think that we need to choose between science and spirit in the rigid way that people often assume. Science is asking one kind of question. Metaphysics is asking another. Spirituality is asking another. Science will ask, how does it happen? Metaphysics will ask, what is reality really? And spirituality asks, what does it mean to live in the right relationship with that reality? Those are not identical questions. Physics can tell us that the elements in the body come from ancient cosmic processes. Biology can tell us that the body is dynamic, renewable, and continually exchanging matter with its environment. Neuroscience can tell us a tremendous amount about the relationship between the brain and experience. But then metaphysics steps in and says, what is consciousness? Why is there an inner experience at all? What is the relationship between awareness and matter? Is consciousness produced, transmitted, filtered, or expressed? And then spirituality asks, how should I live if I am part of something greater? How do I honor this life? How do I heal? How do I wake up? How do I become more aligned with truth? To me, all those questions matter. And I think the most alive conversations happen when we stop trying to make one erase the other. Because science will give us the structure. Metaphysics gives us the depth. And spirituality gives us the lived meaning. What does this mean for healing and understanding? Well, let's bring this back into ordinary life, because that's where all the good philosophy has to land eventually. So if you're a living expression of an ancient universe, if your body is made of matter with a stellar history, if your consciousness is not incidental but meaningful, then your healing matters. Your self-awareness matters. Your willingness to tell the truth to yourself matters. The work that you do to become less reactive, less fragmented, and less unconscious, well, that matters. Because maybe healing is not just personal improvement. Maybe healing is one of the ways that consciousness becomes less divided within itself. Maybe every time you integrate a wound, you're doing more than working on yourself. Maybe you are participating in a greater movement towards a shared coherence. Because it means that your inner work is not selfish, not that it ever was, but now it becomes sacred. It doesn't mean that you become self-important. It means that you become responsible. Responsible for the way that consciousness moves through you. Responsible for what you amplify in the world. Responsible for whether you spread confusion or clarity, cruelty or compassion, delusion or truth. Because if the universe is indeed knowing itself through forms like us, then how we live affects the quality of that knowing, and that's not small. So are we the universe experiencing itself? At this point, yes, I think my answer is yes. I think we are. We may be localized expressions of a much larger field of consciousness. We may be temporary forms through which ancient matter and living awareness meet. We may be one of the ways that the cosmos becomes intimate enough with itself to feel, to question, to remember, and awaken. So even if you hold it only as a possibility, it's a powerful one because it invites a very different relationship with life. You are not cut off. You are not alien to reality. You are not some meaningless little accident wandering around in a dead machine. You belong here. You are made of this. You arise from this. You participate in this. And whatever consciousness ultimately is, it is doing something extraordinary in and through your very own human life. So yes, that meme that I was talking about, it does point to something real, even if it simplifies it. You are made of ancient matter. You carry within you the aftermath of stars. Your body's not fixed, but continually changing. And somehow, through all that motion and exchange, awareness is here. You are here. A conscious being in a universe that has become conscious enough, at least in places, to ask what consciousness is. And whether you see that as biology, miracle, spirit, divine intelligence, or all of the above, it's pretty extraordinary. Creation is not over. Creation is still happening. Maybe the universe is not only expanding outward into space, maybe it is also awakening inward through experience. And every one of us is part of that. So maybe every human being is a place where star matter starts asking questions. And maybe the real mystery is not only that we are made of stardust. Maybe the real mystery is that the stardust is beginning to wonder who it is. So thank you for being here with me today. If you feel that this podcast would resonate with someone you know, please share it. If you'd like to work with me, you can go to my website, gloriadanvershypnosis.com, and book a free consultation. And I'll leave you with that. I'll see you in a few weeks. Bye.